Well, welcome to another episode of Talkin Shop. This is the first time I've done a Talkin Shop remotely. I have my friend Nina O'Neill here, and we are going to build upon the conversation I had with Tyrone Ross down at the Inside ETFs conference about diversity and inclusion. We got a lot of great reception on that video. A lot of good conversations came from it. Tyrone told me today that he's still getting people reaching out to him about that, which is what I wanted. So I wanted to build upon that. I have a bunch of people lined up over the coming months to further the conversation and kind of share experiences. So some of us who haven't had to go through those experiences have our eyes open about what's really going on. And my first one is my friend Nina. So Nina, thank you for taking the time to join me.
Thank you.
It'd be a lot more fun if we were in person one of these days.
I know.
But so obviously the difference between me and you is obvious. It's male versus female. And you've shared some situations in the past that you've gone over through your career. So I thought it would be good to have you kind of talk about what is it that women in the industry have to overcome and battle that men don't have to really go through. And Tyrone and I talked about that we were talking about race in the last one, but he even alluded to the fact that he is a male. So even though he's a minority in the profession, he is a male, and that's an advantage that he has over some other people when talking about diversity and inclusion. So if you don't mind, kind of let some of us that have not haven't traveled the path that you've traveled understand some of the hurdles you've had to overcome being a woman in the profession.
Yeah, I mean, there are a few, but one thing that I think men aren't aware of is a lot of the language that we have to hear and deal with repeatedly. For example, yesterday, Wednesday, I sat in on an economic presentation by a well-known investment company. The room had maybe 80 or so people in it. There were 4 women, including me, so 4 total. And I was, by a long shot, one of the youngest people in the room overall, period. So, but when the presenter started talking about a market maker, he kept saying he. So all the pronouns when he's using or referring to a person was always he. He would do this, he would do that. And that's what we hear all the time. And I think that when you constantly hear that, then you don't maybe see a female in some of these roles when there's plenty of them in it. And then in contrast, I watched an investment news video by our friend Daniel Crosby, where he, in his video, referred to the advisor as a female, and he kept using the language, "You chose her for a reason." And then the picture that was used by investment news in the video was a female. And it's funny how much that affected me. I was shocked. I was proud of my friend for doing that, and for the production team that I know well as well. I was just really grateful that I know some men that are savvy about that. But I don't think it's something people think about all the time. I just went to lunch with one of my teammates, and she used to work in a large banking organization, and she was saying that she was at a Women in Finance presentation, and someone said, "Oh, are you a teller?" And I'm sure there was no ill intent in that. She's a young female. There's nothing wrong with being a teller, but she actually had a really high level position in the company and worked really hard for it, and had kind of struggled with the same thing. And I've dealt with the same thing. Are you someone's wife or secretary, or who's the decision maker here? And that's frustrating for me because there's no reason not to assume someone's the higher level position, and because you're going to compliment them if they're not. But if you assume they're a different position, you've insulted them. So I think just being mindful of the language that we're consistently presented with is one thing I don't know that men are particularly aware of, because it's not going to affect you the same way. I think another thing that I discuss with a lot of men or hear in conversation is if you're a male and you have either a stay-at-home wife or another counterpart that's handling a lot of the family things. So I say I'm the lead parent, and that's difficult. So that family juggle, I always say the juggle is real. For me, being a female in this business, I'm not only doing, I tell some guys, I'm like, I'm not just doing your job, I'm doing your wife's too. I don't have that same support system. The teachers are going to go to me. The babysitters are going to go to me. I've got to deal with the child care, the doctor visits, the sports stuff, the birthday parties. Are they signed up for camps? that takes an emotional load, and a physical load, and a mental load that I'm not sure certain men always have to take on as well. So particularly with young families, as you well know, there's a lot going on. You have more kids than I do too. But there's a lot to take care of on the home front that I'm not sure every man has ever had to deal with or has that in mind when they're thinking about their female counterparts that have families.
When I would even chime in on the family part and say that, take a step back from our profession and just as being husbands, being aware of the fact that a lot of that stuff just default to our wives and maybe trying to pick up the slack and helping out in some areas. So that's something that I try to do personally, and I'm not patting myself on the back, but like
That's great.
I do a lot when it comes to, like, my wife has her store. So she basically has one employee that can work each day of the week. And if one of those employees is sick, she has to go in, which means rather than have her stressed to have to go find a babysitter or figure out what she's going to do with the kids, usually I'm flexible enough with my schedule that I can help cover to take that stress off of her and put that on my plate. Because I would rather bear that stress than have her, because she's already stressing out over the store. So I would say be mindful of that with our counterparts in the profession, but also think about how we can help our wives at home. And I think if you're thinking about your wife that way, it's going to spill over to the women you might work with, in the workplace. The other thing I was going to say, I catch myself when I'm writing blog posts, talking about advisors, and I always go back to they, their, kind of the gender neutral. But I think now I'm going to make a conscious effort to sprinkle in she's and hers throughout. My question to you is, being a woman, so I do that on some. Is it okay then to go around on the other side on other blog posts and be the he side, so that instead of always defaulting to there, sometimes I use he, sometimes I use she, and then that way everybody's covered? What are your thoughts on that?
I think as long as you're doing it all and not just
Right.
one,
Mm-hmm.
I think that's fine.
Okay. I'm going to make a conscious effort. And the first time I do it, I'm going to give you a hat tip in my blog post and tag you. So you know that you see it. But it is little things like that. I would say at one step, I realized that I'm writing he a lot. So let's stop that. But I didn't make that Daniel Crosby step and go around and do she. I think I've done that one time, but I need to make a conscious effort to do that. So this is why I love these conversations, is because it's helping me get better and realize the little things that I am silently, signaling that I'm not even aware of. So hopefully other people watching get that as well. And it's the little things that add up. So now that we've kind of talked about those things and put some things for us men and to think about, why do you think it is that, Blair wrote about the lack of women in our profession in the New York Times piece? Why do you think it is that women do not come to the financial services? Is it the barriers that put up? Is it the old good old boy culture? Why do you think women don't come to become financial advisors and investment professionals and work in this space?
Yeah, but Blair's not the only one that wrote about it. I wrote an article in Financial Planning Magazine about not just attracting women, because that is a problem. Retaining women is a big problem as well, and kind of why I thought that. But I think to your question on what keeps women from joining, I didn't know this was a profession. I didn't grow up with my family having an advisor. I'm from a small town in Eastern North Carolina. A couple of shops, Edward Jones, banks, stuff like that. And my parents had people, but they're not the advisor that I see today. It's, the older broker concept. They didn't have financial planning for sure. So I didn't know really what that was. I knew what a stockbroker was, but I didn't know what a financial advisor was. And I certainly I don't think know of any women that did that job. So I think just you don't know what you don't know. So I was, excited to learn about this job, and I've called myself the accidental advisor. I fell into it and I love it. And, but another thing is, I think if you just look at the job, it doesn't look very fun. I think there's a perception that it is a lot of men, like if I think of a mental image of a financial advisor, and I think what the general public might think, it's a man in a suit at a warehouse. Mm-hmm. And so I don't think that for me in the past, that would have been something that said, yeah, that sounds fun. I want to analyze stocks all day, or I want to, check out mutual funds, when I think there's a big disparity of what the public thinks that we do and then what we actually do. So I think women are really great connectors. I know I love that. I think we're uh, often natural nurturers or have some of that, and we're really great with relationships in general. Ongoing relationships. We have to be many things to many people just by being females. We're sisters, we're mothers, we're wives, we're friends, and I think that carries naturally over to this profession. I'm just not sure people see that if they've never had an experience with an advisor that was like that. So I think just being unclear on what the job is one of the biggest things out there. And then also women, traditionally, this is changing drastically and quickly, but I don't think women have been involved in as much of the financial decisions and did not see their mothers. And so feeling inadequate in that regard or unknowledgeable, or that it's not for women to do, I think that's potentially maybe a misconception as well. It's just they don't feel that that's a good job for them, because they haven't seen a lot of women do it.
Well, I think of my grandmother. When my grandfather passed away, she had never done anything on the finances. So in her, let's call it late 70s, early 80s, she had to learn how to balance a checkbook, like go get CDs at the bank, and she had no idea how to do it. So yeah, my mom never saw that. And if I think about my mom, she's not very comfortable when it comes to the finances. So if something happened to my dad, it'd be a huge learning curve for her. But I think that what the story you tell is very similar to what Tyrone mentioned, and just that as far as the inclusion, not just inclusion in like who we bring in, but inclusion in including more people, of letting them know that you can do this profession. So whether it's going out and speaking and to little kids and letting them know what a financial advisor does, it's more the inclusion is bringing people in, but I think it's also including more people to let them know that you can in fact do this. And I think that's good pub for our whole profession across the board, like breaking the reputation that we're investment people and all we do is investments, and letting them know what a true financial advisor really does. That's helpful across the board. And I think you're right that would bring more women and other non-white males to the table to become financial advisors. So I think that makes sense. It speaks to what Tyrone said. So my final thing for you is, you said something to me early on when we first met and started talking and kind of trading notes, that sometimes women within the profession can be their own worst enemy. And I think that's very interesting. And then as we think about diversity and inclusion and the barriers that are put up for different people, I don't know if people think about the own barriers we put up against people who might look like us. So can you elaborate on the women being their own worst enemy sometimes?
Yeah, I think some women in our profession, I think there's a very similar personality type. A lot of us, I am a very dominant personality. I have a big personality. We've kind of had to fight our way through our careers. And so I think a lot of times, instead of being collaborative, it can feel somewhat competitive, especially I look early in my career, and I really had no female mentors. I knew of women advisors, but they were not women that I would have felt extremely comfortable saying, hey, will you mentor me? I mean, I was, they were great people, but they weren't nurturing me in any way, shape, or form. They were nice, but, I think really trying to reframe our brains. I know you and I are collaborative with a lot of other advisors, and I just have that mindset of we all do better together, and there's plenty of money to go around. And I've tried to reach out to women, or if any have reached out to me, to really be there for them as much as I can on a call, or just be a person that they can go to. But we really need a better community of that within the women in our organization, within our industry and our profession, and not looking, this is not a competitive situation. We can learn so much more and share more. When I had my kids, it was really hard because I had a lot of struggles that I was dealing with, a lot of things, physically, emotionally. I'd slept in years, but I didn't have anybody in my profession that I felt like I could talk to about it at that time. And I felt very lonely. I ended up kind of creating starting an initiative with some women locally that were women professionals, doing some retreats and stuff to try to create that community. But I really was sad because I wanted to talk to someone that knew what I did and understood that man's world, as I was, I mean, I've said more than once, I went to my first Excel conference with a breast pump on my back, talk about standing out. But no man's had to deal with that. And, scheduling meetings between pumping and, I mean, things that maybe TMI, but I needed to talk to a girl. My business partner is awesome, but he's a dude. He just didn't, he hadn't gone through the same experience. So I really kind of feel sad for myself that I didn't have that community at that point that I do now. And I'm so grateful for the amazing women advisors and women in fintech and just all the women that I've been able to meet and collaborate with now. It's been really powerful, and I hope that continues to grow.
Like I said, I thought that was a very interesting comment that has stuck with me, and so I'm glad that you're able to kind of share more on that. Well, that was kind of what I wanted to make sure that we go over. And send me the link to your financial advisor magazine. I did not mean to cut you out of getting publicity for what you've
I'm just kidding. Yeah.
Blair was top of mind because that's the most recent one that got a lot of.
Hers was more recent. Yes. I'll send you the link to the financial planning one. Yeah.
Send me the link to that, and I will put that in the show notes on allaboutyourbenjamins.com so everybody can read that as well. I want you to get your credit also.
Well, it gives men a lot of credit in that article.
Okay. Well, good. That's nice.
Good.
Well, I appreciate you taking the time and doing the Zoom. Hopefully this all turns out real well. I know for viewers, this is probably not the best format. It's always better to have us in person, but I want to keep the momentum with this initiative that I have rolling. And so this is better than us not doing it at all.
Better than nothing. Yeah. Right. We'll have plenty in person. I know we will.
Right. And so the message will be heard. The conversations will continue. So I thank you for taking the time and kind of I don't think this is stepping out of your comfort zone, but there is some risk to having these types of conversations. So I appreciate you being willing to put yourself at risk for whether it be feedback or criticism, whatever it might be, to have this convo with me. I really do appreciate that. So thanks for taking the time.
You're awesome. Thank you.
And thank you everybody for watching. Let's keep this conversation going. You can find both of us on Twitter. Go find Tyrone again. And like I said, I've got at least 5 or 6 other people that are going to help me continue this conversation from all over the spectrum. So I'm real excited about this. So Nina, thank you again. Thank you everybody for watching. Check the show notes on allaboutyourbenjamins.com and read Nina's article. And I will see you all in the next episode.